portions in the Book of Numbers. So, quick word or two about myself. I've been a Jewish educator for pretty much my entire career, with a short bit of documentary filmmaking on the front end. Um, I've primarily worked in Reform congregations in the New York City area, most recently at Temple Emmanuel, a large Reform congregation on the east side of Manhattan. Toby Burko, who's one of the executive directors. Um, yeah, very nice. Um, uh, the Toby Burko is my sister, and so that was the connection of how I got to Wilshire Boulevard. But I'm particularly honored to be teaching this class because Stanley Davids had been on the clergy team, the senior rabbi at Central Synagogue, right before I had come on the staff there. But my wife was a member of Central Synagogue growing up, and so had very fond memories of him. And when the two of us lived in Israel and Jerusalem for 2 years, Stan and Risa really took us in kind of as like adopted family. Really we're kind of like our parents in Jerusalem when we were away from our own parents for like a good 2 years. And so it's just I want to say that it's a great honor to get to study with all of you who've had the opportunity to study with him. And also, I'm very aware of the size of the shoes that I need to be filling in this particular session, and the level of learning and capacity that you're all bringing to the table from what I know from him. So, um, I'm going to do a little bit of introduction about Bamidbar and in this book that we're about to read. But I thought that it would be helpful for me if folks, some of you, I think, have probably studied this portion several times already, and it would just be helpful for me if we could do a go around. If anybody wants to introduce themselves and maybe share either something that you've thought about, you've already thought about as we're approaching this first section of the Book of Numbers, or if there's just something that you'd like to tell me about this group, this Torah study class, that would be useful or helpful for me. I was told that everybody has their own copy of the text, so I didn't print out text for everyone except for one part that's supplemental material that I'll share with you on screen later on in the session. So um, I'll start. For me, I really like the Book of Numbers because I think the stories are weird and wonderful. But frankly, these first chapters of the Book of Numbers I find a little bit impenetrable. There's lots of long lists of names, and while I will talk a little bit about why I think that's important and relevant, I definitely among the folks who prefer the narrative elements of the Bible over the uh, kind of priestly sources that go into details about legislation and and ritual. So let me just go around and see if anybody would like to share a little bit, just who you are, and then either your connection to this class and something you think I should know about this class, or your connection to this Torah portion, and either a question that you already have or a thought that you already had, something that's rippling up for you. We'll just take a few minutes for anyone who'd like to share here at the start of the class. And don't be shy, just like unmute yourself and jump in.
My name is Rebecca. I've been in this class for probably 3 years, and thank you for the heartfelt things that you said about Rabbi Davids. I truly miss him. And I really like Numbers myself. It's got a weird English name to it that doesn't make sense with the entire book. So it's always curious to me why it wasn't named something else, more
Great,
closely related to the Hebrew word.
great. Thank you.
I'm Steve Miller. I've been in this class certainly for over a decade. And I think the only thing I want to share is one of the things we all loved about Rabbi David's, and it was never the same. Sometimes we do a lot of text, sometimes not, but the depth of his knowledge, both at times when appropriate, we would do an analysis of the text, the anomalies, the bad translations. He would also bring in from time to time, or often, history and historical context, and occasionally comparative religion. And, it was a very in-depth and educate and I don't want to say esoteric. I want to say it was a deeply rooted in, studying. It was, I've gone to many other types of classes in Torah studies and often find them at a very superficial level compared to what
Mhm.
we're used to.
Beautiful. Yeah. As you can imagine, like that level of scholarship was, his Shabbat dinner guests were that was what the conversations were like. So I know exactly what you speak of, and I hope that you'll bring some of that wisdom, and all of you will bring some of that wisdom to this conversation today. Ray, I see you have a hand raised.
Thank you. Yes, I second everything about uh, Stanley Davids that Steve just mentioned, and I've been a member of this group intermittently since about 2018. And at this transitional moment, I too wish to honor Stanley Davids and sketch a little bit of the mood he created here, recognizing that you will do something different and you should do something different. But what was beautiful about him is, yes, his knowledge was deep and profound, and his pedagogy with us was stunningly resourceful and malleable according to what was happening, and eminently respectful and encouraging of the push and pull between what we were having as reactions to the text and the conversation and certain points that he wanted to make sure to share with us. But what I appreciated especially is that his orientation and emphasis was always. Yes, is there an issue? Okay, his orientation was always text-based, and whether or not each of us individually had different beliefs that we brought to it, he always started and proceeded with attention to what was happening in the text while honoring in the room a variety of different spiritual and non-spiritual connections we may experience with the material, and had a firm but gentle way if things were getting a little bit too particularized in a spiritual direction, to gently rein us back in toward the text. And I admired all of that and so much more about what he did with us.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you for that tribute. That's beautiful. Okay, I see Merle and then Brad, please.
Yeah, I've been a member of Wilshire since I was like 5 years old when we moved to Los Angeles. And I just appreciate that these classes are on Zoom because obviously I can't run back and forth as often as I'd like. And I just appreciate whatever learning I can get out of from whatever scholars. I mean, Rabbi Davids was amazing, but I think everybody has something to teach. And I think whoever teaches these classes is, they're providing us with a lot of education. And I think that's very important.
Great. Good. Nice attitude. I'll take that. Brad, were you on deck?
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what's already been said so eloquently by others, but I'd like to know a bit more about you and your scholarship. You're working on a PhD. Do you have a dissertation topic at this point? And what is your interest?
Thank you for asking. I'll speak very briefly. I'm also going to be back next week, and we'll be able to continue to get to know each other then. I'm writing about how people find meaning and purpose in their work and what happens
Mm.
when they do. So I interviewed 6 Reform rabbis who also have a degree in education to look at the ways that they see those two degrees interacting with one another. Do they feel more like rabbis, more like educators, some kind of combination of the two? Where does it inspire them in their work to have these two different approaches to understanding meaning making? And then what are some of the things that happens when you care deeply about what you do for a living? Does it on the one hand have benefits like career retention and life satisfaction. But on the other hand, does it have kind of maybe some negative ramifications, like staying in a job perhaps longer than you should because you love what you do so much you can't imagine leaving it, or even being underpaid for the kind of work that you do because you're willing to work at a lower salary with a passion tax. So but that's it, like kind of in a nutshell. Thank you for asking. But I want to make sure we also get to focus on the Torah portion. So I'm going to put like a 3 more minute time limit on people sharing, even though I know not everyone has had a chance to speak. Mara and Harv, would you like to say a word about either a question you have about the text or an idea you have, or something about this class that you think I should know?
I have hope for the text, which is that given that the text is Bamidbar, in the desert, that I'm curious about how we can make ourselves count, or feel that we are counted when we're in the desert.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for that lovely like little midrash right there on it. And we'll come back to that idea as we look at the text itself and see how the Torah does and doesn't perhaps align with our own sense of who should be counted. Cindy, I'm going to let you have kind of the final word in this section of our class.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm going to have to kind of be in and out. I have a situation here, but I've been in from the beginning, and one thing I'm very aware of, we treat the Torah, there's an awareness that these are stories, but we treat what we study as the Word of God, with each word having meaning.
I love that. And I want to say that I very much ascribe to the belief that whether or not you attribute divine authorship to the Torah, there is a narrative approach that takes the language of the Torah extremely seriously and says this is the text as we have it, and it's been preserved in precisely these words with great care over centuries. And so perhaps divinity arises even just out of that process. But also, if you're completely an atheist, there's a value in saying the people in the generation before us and the generation before that and the generation before that found it critical to keep every one of these words, every one of these letters, every one of these spaces exactly the way that they were, no matter how uncomfortable it made them, no matter how confused it made them. They said, we want to preserve the text exactly as it stands. And in this era, when we're seeing so much falsehood and deception coming out in media, especially media that comes online, the idea of having something that is so concrete, that has to be written by hand, that must be exactly preserved the way it was in the previous generation, and that this is a process that's gone on for so many generations at this point, I think is something that's a very precious thing for us to uphold and for us to grapple with each week. And so why don't we say together the blessing for grappling with the Torah, which is our business, as you know, it's our job as Jewish people. Please join together with me. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Amen. So this book of Bamidbar, or Numbers, it starts out with the tent of meeting. And this is our tent of meeting that we've constructed right here of us coming together. The tent of meeting is the meeting place between the divine and the human. And we're going to explore what that means and how that plays out throughout the Torah. What I'd like to ask is, if someone has the text in front of them, if you could just read the first two verses to us, which will ground us in this text, the very first text of the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. And then I'll say a few more general words as a jumping off point. Is there someone who feels comfortable reading aloud for us? Rebecca, thank you so much.
The Lord spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai, in the tent of meeting, on the first day of the second month, in the second year after they had come out of the land of Egypt, saying, Take a census of all the congregation of the people of Israel, by families, by fathers' houses, according to the number of names, every male, head by head, from 20 years old and upward. All in Israel who are able to go forth to war, you and Aaron shall number them company by company.
Okay.
Continue.
No, let's stop there, because so much is in just those first verses. So first of all, why the book of Numbers? Why the book of Bamidbar? It's not the most creative name. The book starts with so many censuses throughout this Torah portion. We're going to see many different kinds of counting. And so the name that we've got in English, Numbers, reflects that idea that this is a book that's very focused on numbers, not only numbers of people in the Israelite nation, but the numbers that are involved in the sacrifices, the numbers that are involved in the offerings that people have to bring under different circumstances, the numbers that are involved in making payment, as we're going to see. If you don't, if you aren't going to be doing divine service. And so numbers weave throughout this, just as words weave throughout the book of Deuteronomy, or in Hebrew, Devarim, words. The Hebrew title, Bamidbar, in the wilderness. I like the word wilderness as an evocative translation of Midbar. Midbar Sinai, the Sinai desert, but really wilderness, I think, captures more the sense of uncertainty and the unknown of this kind of desert. Not a familiar place, not a flat place that you can see from miles and miles, but a place of real the unknown. I think that's evocative, but in fact, it's only called that not to be a clever name, as much as I think that we can look at it like that, but because it's the first key word that shows up in the first sentence, just like in each Torah portion. It's not necessarily named for the greatest theme of the portion, but just the first real noun or verb that stands out so that you would know it's its own portion. So in this case, and the Lord spoke to Moses, and God spoke to Moses in the wilderness of Sinai. So wilderness is the first thing that's really distinct. You couldn't call it, Adonai or Moshe. Wouldn't stand out as a Torah portion. So what are we grounded in here in the wilderness? What things do we know? Well, we're not grounded exactly in a location. We just know that we're somewhere in the wilderness of Sinai, but we are grounded in time. We know exactly when it is. It's the second month of the second year from their going out from Egypt. So we've had some time to get to know one another. We've been to Sinai already. We've received the commandments. And now we're starting to have a sense of we're on our way to our homeland, the promised land of Israel. And let's look at what's going to be in this book as a whole, since this is the first book, first portion in the book of Numbers. So the first 10 or so chapters seem to be a continuation of the book of Leviticus. It's definitely, if you ascribe to source criticism, that there's multiple schools who authored the Bible. This is the priestly source in these first 10 chapters, and it's focused on, like the other priestly source materials, ritual surrounding worship and sacrifice, and laws, legislation that engage with questions of purity, wholeness, and our relationship with the divine, how we should encounter the divine. The second half of the book, or more than half, seems to be a continuation of the book of Exodus. It goes back to a narrative approach, telling us some of the most famous stories, starting with the story of the spies scouting out the land of Israel and seeing whether it's time to conquer, to return to the land. Now, we all have read the Torah before, so we know that that's not going to go well. And it's going to end up with 40 years of wandering. But the Israelites don't know that at this point, that the Bnei Yisrael still believes that they are on their way to the promised land right now. They're right in between this, Nile crossing and their return to their homeland. But after the story of the spies, there's going to be a period of time that's going to elapse, including the rebellion of Korach, the blessing of the Jewish people by Balaam, the prophet, a non-Israelite, in one of the classic comedic tales of the Bible. But none of that has happened yet, and we're setting out on that journey. Steve, I see you have a hand raised.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of the things I always find very curious about all of this, and of course we go skip a bunch of years, but early in the Bible, people go from what we're now considering the promised land to Egypt. They go back and forth as if it's nothing. It's like going from LA to San Francisco for a day meeting. We have Jacob coming down to Egypt and finding Joseph after his brothers come down. Abraham goes to Egypt. They come and go as if it's nothing. And now here we are in what's a day trip, turning it into, more than a lifelong journey. And I've always found that odd, I guess. I don't know how else to describe it.
Right. The question is why? Why can't they just do the journey the same way that we saw it happening literally with every single generation of patriarchs makes their way back and forth to Egypt? Like, why isn't that the case here? There is a verse, which I'm not locating at the moment, but it's in Exodus, where God explicitly says that he's going to take the Israelites the roundabout way to get to the promised land. And it doesn't explain why that is, why God is taking the Israelites on the roundabout way. It could be that God wants to give them time to get used to their situation, to understand what freedom means and what choice means. There could be a growth process involved there. We could think perhaps there's other reasons that God might want the Israelites to not take the direct route from liberation, slavery to liberation to redemption. Maybe there's a message for all of us that there's no straight route from slavery or bondage or oppression to redemption directly, that it's always got to be a circuitous path. But it does explicitly say that that's God's intention. So I think that you're right. Like geographically, it could have been a faster trip than the Bible has made it out for this generation. It's not what God wants for them. Brad, I see you have a hand up.
Yeah, the word wilderness to me is very evocative because, I'm not a scientist, but when I think of the wilderness and I think of flora, when I think of fauna of other than human beings, this is an area where there isn't morality. Yes, there's the law of the jungle, and we've just been given a moral code. And now the issue is, what are we going to do with that moral code that we've just been given? So I think the idea of the wilderness is extremely evocative.
That's beautiful. And I think that also is a very nice kind of also response to Steve's point, which is there's this opportunity for us to practice using that moral code here in the wilderness before we have to use it in the promised land where it's going to be our home. Like first we're going to like learn how to do it in this place where there's going to be trials and experimentation. I want to speak a little bit more about the wilderness, but first I want to see what Ray has to say.
Thank you. And I too am speaking to Steve's question about God's leading the children of Israel on a more circuitous path to the promised land. And this is a semi-question, semi-drosh for further contemplation. But it occurs to me that this is in that category of things where sometimes God's engagement with the events seems to suggest a God who, it poses the paradox to us. Is God omniscient and pre-omniscient, prescient, or not? And there are suggestions throughout Torah that God both somehow knows everything, but is responding to evolving circumstances, which suggests non-prescience. And I'll at least put on the table for whoever wishes to think further about the idea that whatever God imagined as the promised land may not in that moment have been absolutely known concretely to God either, so much as maybe promised landness, the inevitability of a promised land, without necessarily knowing its exact location and confines. And so in the aspect of God's character, as I believe we sometimes see, where God appears not to know everything in advance, this suggests a God that has every intention of fulfilling a promised land commitment without yet knowing the particulars. And that circuitous path may have involved a little bit of exploration through developing events before God understood necessarily what the promised land would end up being.
I love that. And that really fits with how I think of the God of the Torah. Torah obviously means teaching. And I like to picture the God of the Torah as a teacher, not only a commander, but a teacher. And when what you've just described is so clearly what every teacher has to do. You come up with the lesson plan for your students, but you don't know for sure what's going to happen in that moment of encounter and how the students are going to take the lesson and make it their own. And I think that it's a beautiful analogy that you've given us of a God who perhaps knows how to set things up, but is willing to allow for the possibility that humans are going to make some changes in how things look along the way and won't stop that from happening. Really, it's a beautiful image. David?
Yes. We don't appreciate what is, or take for granted, we take for granted what is just given to us. If we don't work hard for it and do something, if we do work hard, then we appreciate it more. So if it was a direct, easier route, then the Hebrews would not have necessarily appreciated the land of Israel and what it took for that. So I think that's human nature.
Fantastic. Oh, what a good drash. Thank you for that. Mara and Harv.
What Ray said reminded me of the phrase from theater, the willing suspension of disbelief. And it strikes me that as we try and understand the omniscience of God, or, well, if we believe in the omniscience of God, it strikes me as a really wonderful way of understanding how a God who is willing to suspend disbelief in terms of that omniscience, if that makes any sense.
That God is the one who is suspending disbelief. It's not us suspending disbelief, but God. Wow, that is a powerful theology. I'm going to let us all sit with that, and maybe that can be a theme that can recur over the coming weeks. But I want to make sure we stay in the book of Numbers a little bit here. So I'm not gonna dig deeper into that at the moment. But I'd love for us to keep that with us because that's a powerful and I think somewhat unique way of talking about it. I don't think I've heard that before, and I want to sit with that as well. I want to return back to this topic of the wilderness, the notion that the wilderness is this chaotic, disordered place. And here we are marching forward with the Torah, as we're going to see in next week's Torah portion, but literally in front of us, and our sense of morality in this place of immorality. This is central to the priestly endeavor that we see in the Torah. When we look at what is it that texts that are attributed to the priestly authors are concerned with, they're concerned with making order out of chaos. In fact, when we look at the story of creation, the priestly version of the story of creation is all about how does God take tohu vavohu, chaos and disorder, and make it into a very clear, delineated world that operates so effectively around us. And here too, the priests are concerned that life is like being in the wilderness. It's chaotic, it's unpredictable, and we're dependent on forces beyond our control for our safety and for our well-being, just like the manna that falls from the heavens that sustains the Hebrews as they're traveling. We too are often unable to be in charge of our own destinies to the degree that we want to be. And so the priests want to give us that feeling of autonomy, authority, and empowerment. Why is this so important to the priests? Well, there's a lot of different possibilities that they see the value of these laws, these regulations that regulate personal behavior and cultic practice is establishing a vision of order and stability in the days when there was a kingdom of Judah, and the priests were involved in the class that was meant with establishing this hierarchical society. This becomes a basis for that authority. One that is, everyone knows their place in the society. And as we'll see, that can happen in terms of who's given which roles in their responsibility to the tent of meeting. But it could also be because this originates from that period in between the first and second temple periods, or at least that's when it really became crystallized into these texts as we now have them, and that this sense of being in exile is the same sense of being in the wilderness of Sinai, that we are out of the land of Israel. We're in Babylon, where we're in a place that is filled with the unknown, where we're not empowered to run our own society, and that we're longing, striving to go back home, go back to this land of Israel, and then perhaps afraid that we're never going to quite make it there, just like these Hebrews who don't know it yet, and they're not going to make it to the promised land. It's going to be their children, the next generation, that's going to make it there. And this perhaps is a message that we still, every generation saw this in their own experience of longing for a return home, maybe even just the return to the womb, if we want to go in psychological terms, as an ideal that we're aspiring towards. But then this book of Numbers, Bamidbar, is what do we do on the journey? How do we organize our society? How do we treat one another? How do we treat ourselves? How do we relate with the sacred when we are in the wilderness, when we are in exile, when we're in these places of uncertainty and a lack of authority? What do we do in order to ensure that we can have some stability, some structure, some order, and some sanctity in our daily existence? And so this tent of meeting that shows up in the very first verse of this book, that's going to be our physical and spiritual center. It's going to be the thing that's going to hold us as a people together. It's going to be where we're going to connect with God. And perhaps the most important thing about this tent of meeting is it's not a structure. It's not like the instructions that we're going to receive and that we received in the book of Exodus about building the temple in Jerusalem. This is meant to be a portable sanctuary. We're going to get clear instructions for how you assemble it and then how you pack it up and travel with it and who's carrying which ritual objects and which pieces of it as we journey from place to place. So that tells us not only our role, but also it tells us that this idea of our connection with God is going to travel with us through these elements of danger. Staying still is less dangerous than traveling, right? Being on the journey, you're always going to be encountering the unexpected. When you're staying still, you can build up a stable kind of defense for yourselves. The journey brings uncertainty. So we're going to be skipping a little bit from the text. I want to show you one specific thing. I want to kind of like give you some bigger picture things about the text without reading them themselves. And so we can focus on one text in particular. I hope that that's okay with everyone. Stop me if I'm going too far away from the text. So what's this idea of like giving us all roles towards the tent of meeting and how we're organized? I think my friend and teacher, Rachel Brody, is attributed to have said, "We do the magic so God can do the miracle." I really like this. Like you think about magic, there's a secret. Like if you learn how to do the sleight of hand, the craft, you understand how it's done. Like any of us can learn to be magicians. Any of us can learn to be the Levites who have a job in terms of carrying the tent of meeting and the different implements of it. But we do that explainable, even scientific, rational thing because there's things that are unexpected and unexplainable, inexplicable, and those can only be done by God. That's the miracle. And we're going to come back to that in just a minute when I'm going to share with you a particular story that's based on this Torah portion. The holy objects that we're going to be carrying, part of that priestly concern with setting clear boundaries. And then the division of society into classes. So this census that we're seeing at the beginning, that we just heard read out loud, every male from every tribe from 20 years and up is going to be conscripted into the army. And so we're taking a long census in order to see what is our military might? What's our force going to look like as we're traveling forward? But one group is not counted, and that's the Levites. The Levites are the class of the Israelites that are going to have a specific role, which is going to be divine service. Now, why is it that we're not counting the Levites? One, we're counting all of those who are of, men aged 20 and up. Wouldn't we want to know how many Levites there are as well? Well, presumably we're not counting them here because they're not going to fight, and we need to know what the army is going to look like. And so we're not counting them at this point. We are in chapters 3 and 4, the ending chapters of this portion, going to hear about the roles that the Levites are going to play. And we're going to get a count of them at that point. And it's going to be those 30 and up, not 20 and up, that are going to be counted. Why 30 and up? Maybe divine service requires more maturity than military service. Maybe it requires more training than military service. But it's going to be a separate count of the Levites. So I want to pull up two texts for us to look at, one from the portion and one from outside the portion. The one I want to pull up that's from the portion comes from chapter 3, verses 40 to 48. So if someone can get there with some speed, and is comfortable reading, we're going to read just this text from 40 to 48, and then I want to see if you can recognize the contemporary, thank you, Rebecca, the contemporary Jewish ritual that's still, you may or may not be familiar with it, but there is a ritual that we still do to this day, and here's the origin of it. Okay, so we're starting with verse 40 in chapter 3.
And the Lord said to Moses, number all the firstborn males of the people of Israel from a month old and upward, taking their number by names. And you shall take the Levites for me, I am the Lord, instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites instead of all the firstlings among the cattle of the people of Israel. So Moses numbered all the firstborn among the people of Israel as the Lord commanded him, and all the firstborn males, according to the number of names, from a month old and upward, as numbered, were 22,273. And the Lord said to Moses, take the Levites instead of the firstborn among the people of Israel, and the cattle of the Levites instead of their cattle. And the Levites shall be mine, I am the Lord. And for the redemption of the 273 of the firstborn of the people of Israel, over and above the number of the male Levites, you shall take 5 shekels apiece, reckoning by the shekel of the sanctuary, the shekel of 20 gerahs, and you shall take them, and give the money by which the excess number of them is redeemed to Aaron and his sons.
Okay. A bunch of things happen there, right? Might be a little confusing, and there's an arithmetic problem going on here. I love when the Bible makes us do that, okay? So, all the firstborn males. Now, this is a subset of counting all of the males, right? But now it's as young, any firstborn male is going to be counted. Why? Because it seems we are supposed to all be given to God. Now, this could be like a sacrifice, like with the binding of Isaac in the Akedah, that where Abraham's commanded to sacrifice his son. But it could also be related to the Exodus story that we just heard about. All of the firstborn of the Egyptians were slain. All of the boys were supposed to be killed by Pharaoh. So in some way, there's a redemption that needs to be done for all the firstborn males and of the animals as well. They belong to God. Now, God is willing to take something in place of these males. For the males of the people of Israel, God is saying, okay, instead of you being mine, I'm going to take you on a one-for-one basis with the Levites. And the Levites are all going to belong to me, and they're all going to have to do divine service, every Levite, whether they're a firstborn or not. And that total number of Levites who works for me is going to exempt all of the firstborn of every tribe who otherwise would be mine. Everybody following me so far? If you were a Levite, you're now working for God in place of all of the other Israelites. And then the same thing happens with the cattle. The Levites' cattle all belongs to God, so we all have to give our cattle to Levites because they won't have anything to eat because the Levites don't have any cattle of their own anymore. Okay, but there's a problem. There's 273 more firstborn men among the people of Israel than there are Levites. So what's going to happen to those 273 men? How are we going to redeem them? We're going to pay for them. We're going to pay the weight of 5 shekels. So a shekel is a unit of weight at this point. It's not a unit of currency. 5 shekels of silver. And they're going to go to the Levites. The Levites are going to use it presumably for their necessities. And that's going to be in place of those 273 remaining Levites. We still do this ritual to this day. Can anyone identify where in Jewish life that appears? Steve, go ahead.
Did you not, Ben?
Exactly. Will you tell everybody what a Pidyon Ben is? Because it's not necessarily something everyone's familiar with.
Well, actually, very few Reform Jews actually do this. Certainly was never done in my family. But essentially, it's just a little ceremony where the parents and grandparents give a coin to usually the rabbi, who then gives the baby back to them, says, "Here's your baby."
Exactly. And so otherwise, your baby theoretically would be bound to do priestly service, just like all of the Kohanim are meant to do that. And even to this day, we keep, even though the temple isn't standing for Jews who are traditionally observant, the people who are from a family that's a Kohen may, for example, not enter into a cemetery or otherwise do different things that preserves this ancestral role that they played in the days of the wilderness. But this it's so interesting to me that here's this custom that if we say, where did this idea come from, we can actually bring it back to this math problem that happened in this week's Torah portion, where there just weren't enough Levites to go around.
I have a question. Do Kohanim and Levites, for groups that still practice this, do they do pidyon bends or not? Because, and they certainly don't go and do priestly service.
Right. There's no priestly service other than the ways that, like there's some restrictions on marriage and things like that among traditional Kohanim. I actually don't know whether people who are Kohanim do a Pidyon Ben. I will
Or
find out
or
about it.
Levites. There are lots of Levites, even though there are fewer Kohanim.
I'll find out about that and I'll let you know next week. Okay. I'll look that up and I'll let you know for next week. That's a great
Thank
question.
you.
Being just Israel, I know the answer for my family, but I actually don't know what the rule is for that. So that's a great question. Um, the other text that I want to bring forward, we're going to just use like one word, really, one name as a jumping off point. So in chapter 2, verse 3, it mentions that in the east side of the camp, the chieftain of the Judites, Nachshon, son of Aminadab, Nachshon ben Aminadab, is going to be there, and the Judites are going to be the ones leading the Israelites forward as they march through the wilderness. That's the entirety of the verse is the reference to this name, Nachshon. Have any of you heard of this fellow Nachshon ben Aminadab before? He's become super popular among young Jewish people, but he's very much outside of the tradition. Harv, I'm seeing you raising your hand.
Yeah, wasn't he the guy who went into the Red Sea first up
You
to?
are exactly right. Now, this is not in the Torah, right? But I'm going to share with you, I'm going to put this up on the screen, okay? I'm going to share with you where this story comes from traditionally. Okay, can you see this text? Is it working?
Yes,
Is it large enough for you to read this, or is this too small?
I can read it.
Okay,
I'm on my screen also.
that's fine on your screen. Great. Okay. Would someone like to read to us then this from Sota 37a? So now we're in the Talmud here. We're outside of the Torah. We're in writings from the rabbis. This is at least 1,000 years later that this is happening, but it could be that it was written down 1,000 years later. It could be that the story is much older, but this comes from a text that's much later. So Sota 37a. Is anyone willing to read out loud?
I can continue.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca.
As it is taught, when the Jewish people stood at the Red Sea, the tribes were arguing with one another. This one was saying, I am going into the sea first. And that one was saying, I am going into the sea first. Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Meir, this is not how the incident took place. Rather, this tribe said, I am not going into the sea first. And that tribe said, I am not going into the sea first. Then in jumped the prince of Judah, Nahashon ben Amminadab, and descended into the sea first, accompanied by his entire tribe.
Okay, stop there. All right, what a story. Okay, so we get to the shore of the Red Sea. Moses lifts up the staff and nothing happens. The sea does not part. And all the tribes are arguing with each other. Or maybe the sea does part. Like we actually don't know for sure from this, right? Maybe the sea parts, maybe it doesn't. We don't know. First story, all the tribes are arguing with each other. I'm going in first. I'm going in first. Like they want the honor, they want the glory. I'm going in first. I'm going in first. But then Rabbi Yehuda says, no, 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 that's not the way the story goes. They got to the edge of the Red Sea. And they're like, I'm not going first. I'm not going first. You go first. You go first. The exact opposite, right? And they're all either way. They're all standing there arguing until Nachshon steps in and leads his tribe forward and leads us all to liberation. Ray, I see you have a hand up.
Thank you. I have a very elementary question that I'll ask and hope that someone else too embarrassed to ask might also benefit. I
Okay.
know so little about Talmud anything. So can you help me understand when it says Soda 37a, is that a source? Is that a commentator? What is Soda and how do we understand who is saying this little piece as it is taught, et cetera, et cetera?
Thank you so much for your question, for the courage and the risk taking of asking something saying like maybe I don't know. That is beautiful, and it's exactly what Jewish teaching should always look like. So I really want to thank you for that. Um, the Talmud is written so that it has page sides. So when it says 37a, that means that is in the book that is called Sota. It's on page 37, the front side of the page. 37b would be the back side of the page. So each leaf has a number, and then there's a side A and side B to each page. It's filled with conversations among rabbis who lived anywhere from 100 BCE to the 6th century BCE in Israel and in Babylon. The Babylonian community was quite Persia? Babylon was quite central. It was actually the center of Jewish scholarship in the 4th, 5th, 6th centuries CE. And so you get quotes that are attributed to rabbis who came much earlier that presumably had been passed down word of mouth. Sota is the name of this particular book. There's many books of the Talmud that usually are centered around particular themes. They could be around legislation that relates to interpersonal damages. They could be ritual. They could be about the holidays. I'm going to put aside what Sota is about because it's kind of tangential and a little weird. Brad?
Yeah, is your point here that you're taking us back to your discussion of risk, that Nachshon is willing to take the risk? And you began with a discussion of risk in the wilderness or risk in the Babylonian captivity. Is that where you're going with this?
Okay, well that's brilliant. That was the punchline that I had set up for 6 minutes from now. So we're gonna still I'll still try and get us there. But thank you for that, because Brad, I think you probably have something you want to add to that if that's the because now we can take it to the next level of okay, so if indeed Nachshon is emblematic of what the book of Numbers is telling us, that we need to be like Nachshon. We need to lead our tribe forward into uncertainty if we're going to get to redemption. There may be discussion that we can then have about that. I want to take us to the second text, but first let's go to Steve.
I just have two mundane questions. The first is, it seems that translation is far more than is in the Hebrew at the top. And the top doesn't even seem to include the first paragraph, because I was curious why they call it the Red Sea as opposed to the Sea of Reeds. And I was trying to see what it said in Hebrew, and that first paragraph isn't in the Hebrew at the top of the page. So
Okay.
those are my two questions.
Okay. You're right. Now that I'm looking at, okay, two questions. Why Red Sea and why is there less Hebrew? It's two reasons. The reason why Red Sea is I just took it straight from how Safaria, the online Jewish source, has it, and uh, sometimes it's translated Red Sea, sometimes it's translated, I think more commonly nowadays, Reed Sea, but this in the translation that was on Safaria, which is the JPS translation. That's the way they had it, and I didn't change it from that. And of course, something I always say at a moment like this is we should remember that always translation is interpretation. Anytime that you're seeing the text in anything other than the original Hebrew, you're reading somebody else's understanding of that text. It's always important to say. And in fact, even for us today, when we look at the text in Hebrew, we're looking at through the lens of contemporary Hebrew. So we've got that also, when we see a word like cheshmal and we think electricity, that's definitely not what they meant in biblical times.
But
Why
also,
is the Hebrew?
even this translation, it says in the English that Rabbi Yehuda said it to Rabbi Meir. I don't see the Rabbi Meir part in the Hebrew.
Right. So there's two pieces to that. The first is I left out that first paragraph I'm seeing now in the Hebrew. I didn't cut and paste very well, so that was good spotting. It starts with the Rabbi Yehuda said to Rabbi Meir, which is the second thing, which is when we get translations of Talmud, often they will add additional words to add context that are implied by the original text, but aren't actually in the text. So when it says Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda said to him, they give us the to Rabbi Meir, even though that's not in the original text in Hebrew or Aramaic, in order to aid our understanding of the Talmud, as if we were the kind of learned Talmud scholars that were working together with a teacher who knew that that's what this text means, and that's the tradition that's been passed down. And that is not something that's, just among Reform Jews. That's a Steinsaltz Talmud. In general, that's what it would be. And I didn't go through and put parentheses around the additions or anything like that. But some translations will call that out more clearly. And those are great questions. So thank you. I'm going to bring us very quickly to this last little piece. This is from Kedushat Levi, Exodus Peshalach. So this is a commentary by a particular rabbi on the portion of about the parting of the Red Sea. And he also brings forward a story about Nachshon, the leader of the tribe of Judah. Nachshon ben Aminadav fearlessly entered the Sea of Reeds up to his neck before it split. So you can see the seas hadn't parted in this telling of the story. At that time, he appealed for help from God, saying the level of the water was about to cause him to drown therein. So this is a very different understanding of why the Red Sea parted. All of a sudden, it becomes about Nachshon's bravery. Like, look, I'm in up to my neck. I'm in this deep. God, if you don't save me, I'm going to drown. And then what will happen then? That's why you've got to create this miracle. Again, we're doing the magic, walking in up to our necks, that God will do the miracle. Steve, I'm going to let you talk in a second, but because we're at time, I just want to bring this to a punchline. This story has been preserved in a midrash that I've never been able to source, but I've heard many times about the prayer Mi Chamocha, which comes from the Song of the Sea, that is sung by the Israelites, first by Moses, then by Miriam, after crossing the sea. They say, Mi Chamocha Ba'elim Adonai, who is like you, God, among other gods. But the strange thing, and you may have noticed this in services, is that the second verse repeats, Mi Kamocha Nedar Bakodesh, who is like you, awesome in holiness, or wonderful in holiness. Now, in the first verse, it says Mi Chamocha. The second time it says Mi Kamocha. why is it pronounced differently the first time and the second time? Why is it with a degation one and without a degation the other? There's no difference in the meaning of those two phrases. They mean the exact same thing. So why is it written with a dagesh one time without the other time? Now, if you're the kind of person who says that's scribal error, at some point, 1,500, 2,000 years ago, somebody put in a dot or left out a dot, and then that got preserved over the centuries. Fantastic. But like I said at the beginning, I'm not comfortable with just leaving it at that because you can do that with anything. Like, why did they tell this story? Why did you have to? We always want to have a reason. So the way that I've heard this story and that I want to share with you is it's about this story of Nachshon. Nachshon is marching into the Red Sea, and as Nachshon is marching in, Nachshon is singing, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, and he's going in deeper and deeper and deeper, and the water gets up to his neck, and he goes, Mi ka. And he's right there. The water is at his lungs, goes into his lungs. He can't say the next line. He can't say Micha because his lungs have filled with water. And it's at that moment that God parts the Red Sea. Now, clearly, there is a message about order from chaos in this as well, and about us in the wilderness, that sometimes we have to be in deep, all the way up to our neck before redemption can happen. And maybe it's a message about faith, and maybe it's a message about initiative. But that's what I pull out of this book of Numbers, that it's not about wandering hopelessly in the desert, never reaching the promised land. It's about knowing that the promised land exists as a real destination. And even if I'm not going to make it there myself today, my children will make it there. And I'm going to walk forward. I'm not just going to sit down here in the desert and complain. I'm going to keep walking forward. And even if my own feet won't get me there, God willing, it'll be the next generation that's going to get there. Okay, I'm going to officially close the class here because I know many of you probably have other places you need to go. Thank you. Thank you, Natalie. I am delighted to have had this time to study with you today. If you want to stick around for a few minutes, I know, Steve, you have your hand raised. I'll stay on the Zoom for a few more minutes unless Hannah says that, we have to give up the room or whatever. And if you want to just sign out now, no worries. And I will see you all next week for our second portion of the book of Bamidbar, our journey through the wilderness.
I just have
Thank you,
one.
and Shabbat Shalom. Oh, and Chag Sameach. Have a great Shavuot.
Thank you. You too.
Thank
I
you,
just have
Shabbat
one
Shalom.
stupid question. Why do they refer to him as the leader of the tribe of Judah? Wasn't Judah the leader of the tribe of Judah?
That's not a stupid question at all, and thank you for asking it. The tribes are named eponymously for Jacob's sons, and in the case of the tribe of Joseph, grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So they're named after their ancestor, but in biblical time, that's 400 years earlier. They're not the generation that departed the tribe of Judah. They're
Right.
descendants of the
That's
tribe
right.
of Judah. And so Nachshon is the leader of the tribe in the generation of the
I should
Exodus.
have figured that out.
That's quite all right. It's an excellent question. And it's always good to add that context. Ray, go ahead. Ray, you're still muted if you're speaking.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry, I was clicking carelessly. So I just have a question as well about the group and your directive from the congregation as well. We do have a practice going back of, at the end of Torah study, doing Kaddish with a list of names provided by the congregation for folks. And I don't know if that piece maybe never got communicated to you. I don't myself have somebody I'm remembering at this time, but I'm wondering if that information got to you, and if that's something that between this week and next week, you may want to check back with the congregation, find out about that, and find out how that list gets distributed for you.
Thank you so much for asking about that. I'm remembering now that that was something I was told, but then I did not receive a Kaddish list yesterday. I was told I would get that, and that would have reminded me that we need to do that today. So I apologize to all of you, and certainly to anyone who's left this Zoom or who's watching it on a live stream or a recording, who was intending to say Kaddish with us. And we will make sure that that happens next week. And thank you for that, because that is a very important piece of this that I will ensure we have time for next week.
Well, thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank
Shabbat
you.
Shalom, Chag Sameach. Have a great
Thank
Shavuot.
you. Chag Sameach, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Yeah. No, why, what's on? Oh, you mean yeah, the temple is finished. It finishes at 10:05. So, thank you. How are you doing? Oh, I didn't watch anything today. Yeah, and you have a good night? Very good, huh? Okay, good. said something that I don't know if you guys believe it. But
to use this model out of the box downstream?
A path to prevention as the nation's leaders take aim to. The Take It Down now makes online extortion and the creation of AI deepfakes a federal crime in the US. It's efforts like these that are giving parents like Eli's a fighting chance.
It is accountable at number one. It's not going to have a war. No war is ever won by one bullet. We gotta win battles.
CBS Saturday Morning, I'm Nicole Valdez in Glasgow, Kentucky.
So well said by Eli's dad there. Having a teenager, it dawned on me, I need to talk to him about it. B, I'm glad there's something there out there because we have to look out for them so much. Well said. Crypto kidnappings on the rise. Coming up, we're going to have the latest on the investigation of the Italian Bitcoin millionaire allegedly tortured in New York City and steps some investors are taking to protect their crypto fortune themselves. Then falsely flagged, more schools are using AI to weed out AI cheating. But what happens when the software gets it wrong? We get to campus for a look at the new challenge for honest students. You're watching CBS Saturday Morning.
Yes. Elon Musk on stage, and then some. This Sunday morning.
Choice hotels like this Comfort Hotel, you get more for your money so you can maximize any vacation, like starting game day with a free hot breakfast. I got waffles, how about you? Waffles! Say twice, get a $50 gift card to book direct. Fix that thing. Double the adhesive for a hold that lasts for the toughest jobs on planet Earth. And for a clear finish, try Crystal Clear Gorilla Tape.
Like a relentless weed, moderate to severe ulcerative colitis symptoms can keep coming back. Break away to what's possible with Tremfya, with rapid relief at 4 weeks. Many people experience remission at 1 and even 2 years. Some saw 100% visible healing of their intestinal organ. Serious allergic reactions and increased risk of infections and liver problems may occur. Recall treatment offers challenges like infections and TB. Tell your doctor if you have an infection, flu-like symptoms, or avoiding the vaccine. Healing is possible with Tremfya. Tremfya is now approved for Crohn's disease. Ask your doctor about Tremfya.
With the values of time, you'll get deals on drinks whenever you get the afternoon sleep.
Buy 1 premium lemonade or frozen drink, now for just $1. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Summer is here and we're kicking off the Bob's Way in all our stores coast to coast. So bring the fam down for free treats.
Everyday low prices of furniture, mattresses, decor, and more.
Delivered in days, not weeks.
No phony sale for gimmicks.
Just the absolute best values you deserve. Whose amazing idea was that? This guy, Bob Kaufman, our founder. You're the goat, Bob.
When you get the furniture you love without delay, there's only one thing to say. Oh my God!
Discount furniture.
Give me 2 seconds. I want to see if they got this video. I brought it to the desk. Just got this brand new video.
Welcome back to CBS Saturday Morning. We begin this half hour with the indictment of 2 cryptocurrency investors in the alleged kidnapping and torture of an Italian tourist here in New York City. It comes after a series of kidnappings in Europe targeting crypto magnates. Allie Bauman is here with the disturbing details. Allie, good morning. Good morning, Dana. Prosecutors allege the 2 men tormented the victim with electric wires, forced him to smoke from a crack pipe, and even dangled him over the staircase of their Manhattan townhouse, all in an attempt to gain his Bitcoin password. William Duplessis appeared in a Manhattan courtroom Friday with bags under his eyes, indicted in a Bitcoin kidnapping scheme, along with John Waltz. Prosecutors allege the 2 men, both cryptocurrency investors in their 30s, lured an Italian millionaire to their ritzy Soho townhouse, where they held him captive and tortured him over 17 days. The suspects were arrested after the 28-year-old man managed to escape and flagged down a traffic cop on the street. Inside the apartment, police say they found body armor, ammunition, and a photo of a gun held to the man's head.
To be tortured for 17 days in terms of a chainsaw cutting your leg, in terms of putting your feet in water, electrocuting them. in terms of making a person ingest narcotics. Horrible crime.
Prosecutors say the suspects took the alleged victim's electronics and threatened to kill his family unless he gave up the password to his Bitcoin wallet worth millions. As the NYPD parsed through evidence in Soho this week, French police have arrested more than 20 people for a number of kidnapping plots targeting crypto tycoons, which include the attempted abduction of an investor's daughter by masked men on a busy Paris street earlier this month.
I don't go to certain crypto meeting anymore where I need to go before. I try to park as close as possible to the destination when I have to go somewhere.
The string of attacks, both abroad and now domestic, have some Bitcoin bigwigs worried for their safety.
Bitcoin's worth over $100,000, and people are still posting screenshots of their holdings, travel plans of where they're going to be. So it's really an attacker's dream because they don't really need to do too much research out there to target these people that now have quite a lot of value in their crypto holdings. And so, unfortunately, these attacks are again becoming more gruesome, more brazen, and are increasing likelihood and severity.
And the two New York suspects are being held without bail. We've also learned the NYPD is investigating two of its own detectives who worked private security at that Soho townhouse. It's unbelievable. What's different about this and say a billionaire being targeted on the street for his debit card password? I mean, it just seems outrageous. There is, some experts would say that there is the belief that